Okay, so this is going to be a shorter video today, and this is just going to be talking about what can go wrong when we try and sample. When we try and sample, what can go wrong with our results? And what we're going to find is that the larger our sample size, the better our prediction is going to be. And we're going to play with this in class a little bit tomorrow. But as we showed last class where we did the samples on state size, even if we do everything right, we're not going to get exactly the answer because this is an estimate. And so what we'll see is that we're going to have what's known as a margin of error. It doesn't mean we made anything wrong, it's just we can only be so precise based on the number of people we had in our sample. And so the larger our sample is, the smaller the margin of error will be. All right, so mistakes that can be made. These are mistakes, as we can, problems with our sampling frame. Sampling frame is the list that we're using to pick randomly from. So an example of a problem with the sampling frame would be if we went to go ask questions of seniors and we printed out a list, and it was a list, we went to do this the week before graduation, and we had a list of last year's juniors. People move, people do different things, so we want to make sure our list that we're drawing from is completely accurate. And so one of the examples of a problem with this is you can't pick people randomly out of the phone book anymore because A, it used to be that some people didn't have their phone numbers listed in the phone book, but B, now a lot of people don't even have home landlines. They only have cell phones. So you have to have an accurate list of people to select from. Also, under coverage is a problem. We need to make sure we're sampling people, the right people in the population. If we were just to randomly select people on any given day of school, say on a Friday, and we just said, okay, we're going to randomly select people from school, and we're going to ask about people who skip school for the weekends. Well, if we do that on a Friday, we're not asking the people who are skipping school on Fridays. So we need to make sure that our entire population is covered. And all of this stuff is design. When you design your study, are we making sure we're setting up our sampling and our questions correctly? A big problem is non-response. You can ask someone a question, that doesn't mean they're going to answer it. You can call someone at home and say, hey, do you have a few minutes to talk about the upcoming election? They can be like, no, click. And so we need to try and make sure that when we do polling, that the people we ask the questions for answer them. Because if we just go on to the next person, then it's not going to be representative of the population. It's only going to be representative of the people who bothered to respond. This is why any poll you see on a website is immediately flawed, because those people were A, not randomly selected. So the only people who answer the internet poll are the people that cared enough to click on it and answer it. And so that poll will not tell you anything about the population at large. It only tells you about the people who answered the poll. And remember, the whole reason we're doing this sampling is we're trying to make inference about the population at whole. Remember, we had the distinction between population and the sample. And we're trying to use the sample to estimate something about the population. But if we don't set up our sample correctly, then all it tells us about is our sample, and we don't know anything about the population. Now, even after you do everything correct, you design, you have the perfect frame, you have the perfect selection method, you get everybody who you talk to answer your questions, they can still lie to you. All right? There's a study a few years ago, in hospitals, infection is a major problem. And so they really stress that how often do you wash your hands? How often, are you washing your hands? And so they went around and they asked doctors, how often do you wash your hands? Do you wash your hands every time you enter a room? Do you wash your hands anytime you shake hands with somebody? And everybody's like, oh, yes, yes, yes. I don't understand how infection's a problem at this hospital. And then they actually hired people to follow the doctors around. And then they showed the doctors the data. They said, because doctors are educated people, if you show them data, they believe it. And they're like, here's what you said you were doing, and then here's what you were actually doing. And people are not washing their hands as much as they say they are, or even as they think they are. And this is response bias. And this is an example. People will answer surveys dishonestly if something is socially undesirable, right? If you ask people, do you support gay marriage in this day and age, most people are going to say yes, because that's the socially acceptable thing. But when they go in the voting booth, they may do something else. And that one's still on the cutting edge, so there might be people who lie both ways. But basically, if there's social pressure, when you ask someone in person, they won't answer it. And there was recently a study that people will lie about church attendance, charitable donations, the likelihood that they will vote in an election. They will say they do that more than they really do, but they will say they do less than they do with alcohol, drug use, tax evasion, and racial bias. And so, and this is all from a fun article I found that we'll talk about more in school tomorrow. But basically, people will lie. And so when you design polls, you actually have to think about how you ask the questions and design them and ask them in a way that people will be honest. If people feel that their answers are confidential, they're more likely to be honest. So like if you ask them face to face, you ask people they might lie to you. If you, on the other hand, said put them behind a screen and say your identity is being compromised and you had, like, your voice came through a thing like this so that they couldn't see who you were, then people would be more likely to be honest with you. Now, this is not a problem with how you designed your survey, this is not a sampling frame error. This has nothing to do with your randomness. This just has to do with the people are lying to you when they answer the questions. And so it's important to distinguish between those two different types. Is the problem in how we design the survey from the ground up, or is the problem with how people are responding to the survey because they're not being honest? And so that's it. This was a really short video. We're going to be doing a lot more practicing with the sampling, stratified, cluster, and those kind of things in class tomorrow. But we'll talk about this a little bit more as well. Nice short video, not a lot of homework. See everybody tomorrow.